think that we are going live. The buttons are all red and signaling that. Welcome to the show, everyone. It has been a while since I have done a live stream with all of you, and I'm pretty excited to be here because I have a wonderful guest with me today, but it's an incredibly important topic which is worth going live about today. We're talking about the future of privacy and free speech on the internet. The stakes are so high, I can't really overstate that. And so I'm absolutely delighted to have Crystal Rose Pierce here chatting with me. She is, of course, the CEO of SenseChat. Welcome to the show, Crystal.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, Naomi.
Absolutely. So today on the show, we're going to be talking about two bills that are currently in Congress, and they would be absolutely devastating to the future of the internet if they were to pass. And one of them is called the Earn It bill. I've talked about that a lot on my show before. And basically, the Earn It bill would create best practices for the internet that would be decided by a commission, and it would be a very anti-encryption commission. And everyone thought that this was a Trojan horse and this would destroy end-to-end encryption. And then they came out with this new bill that's called the Lawful Access to Encrypted Data Act, which is no Trojan horse. It's just blatant disregard for people's right to privacy. So let's delve into this and let's talk about the future of private messaging platforms, the future of privacy on the internet, because as I said, this would be a disaster if it were to pass, and it affects you directly as one of the leaders in the private messaging community. So tell me a little bit about this and what you foresee in the future.
It's so challenging because essentially, basically what this is saying is that if these bills go through, it's that our society no longer affords our citizens any right to privacy. This is a fundamental First, Fourth, Fifth Amendment violation, right? And within both of these bills. And the way that they're worded is that it's the company's responsibility to follow what they're considering best practices. But those best practices mean that any company could be potentially responsible in the way of being sued or taken to court over these different actions, like protecting user data. In this way, they're making the encrypted messaging companies, whether it's your cloud storage or actual messaging like SenseChat or even encrypted email, they're making them liable and basically saying that what we're doing is illegal.
Yeah, it's incredible because, I mean, we've had this safe harbor for the internet for a while. It's basically the linchpin of freedom of speech on the internet is the idea that you can have something like YouTube, you can have something like Medium, you can have these publishing platforms and people can post content on it. And basically what it does is it gives these companies, as you said, this safe harbor so that they're not liable for the content that people would post on their platforms. And what they're essentially saying is we're going to take away this safe harbor. You essentially have to earn this safe harbor, and that would destroy free speech on the internet entirely. And that's not even going near the privacy aspect of this and the fact that they're using this to go after end-to-end encryption. I mean, this would fundamentally change how the internet functions.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we've all been striving in the blockchain community specifically, but in the last few years, any innovative technology has been striving to get us to Web3, which is more distribution, the eventual goal of complete decentralization, where possible, removing centralized internet authority so that we have our freedom of internet back, and we can regain control in a way where users actually own the right to their own data. Right now, the centralized services are there, the intermediaries are intercepting our messages, and I think we're all very much aware of that, and we understand the inherent risks of using platforms that house and store our data. And so for that reason, we seek out other platforms that promise to encrypt our data. If you find something that is advertising on the front page that it is encrypting your data or being specifically about privacy, then that means that the other services probably aren't. You have to see that their privacy policies are very complicated. They're not made for humans to read them. They're in legalese. And if you think about the data acts, we're already in an issue with the large companies. We're already fighting for our data.
Oh, we are buffering at the moment. Apparently, there's buffering everywhere. It says we have excellent connection, and you're coming through fine on my end. But there we go. It seems like we're all back back to normal there. Just wanted to put you on hold because what you're saying is so tremendously important, that point. And, you know, it makes me wonder, because you talk about this legalese, you talk about this sly language people use on their websites. Zoom is a major culprit of this. I mean, they've been saying for years, like, we have end-to-end encrypted video chat. And end-to-end encrypted has a very specific meaning. And we should delve into that, because end-to-end encryption is different from transport encryption. When you transport encrypt something, it means that as it's sent over the internet, no one can intercept it. But end-to-end encrypted means that even if it passes through the server of the company, like if I'm on Zoom and it passes through the Zoom server, that Zoom wouldn't have access to my video conference. Turns out it wasn't end-to-end encrypted at all. They just redefined what end-to-end encrypted means. I mean, that sort of stuff just is unacceptable when you're talking about privacy, because the stakes are so high with privacy that you can't just be fudging terms and saying, well, we just redefine things, you know? So it's so hard to understand what privacy companies actually provide and whether they could be trusted. And then on top of that, to have this kind of sly language, but then the government outright fighting it on the other end. You know, privacy for users is so difficult to obtain these days.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we're using Zoom. We like this platform. We like YouTube, and we even like Facebook for what it provides, or Twitter. Many of us are never going to leave these services for some of the broadcast content that we put out. When it comes to privacy, it's a different story. We assume that Zoom is a streaming service. It doesn't store our videos after we're done having the conversation. We don't know for sure unless we read the details in their privacy policy, and we really understand, you know, are they taking any of the data? Are they storing it for some short or long term? Now Zoom actually, after all of the controversy came out, has a little green check mark. You can pull it down and it says it has enhanced encryption, which is their own definition of what encryption means. So it's your choice of if you want to trust the platform. You know, end-to-end encryption is largely misunderstood. The way that SenseChat works is we trust that you are going to be able to own your own keys on your device, much like the way that Bitcoin or other crypto works. We initially started building on blockchain for that reason, because we think that people should have their own keys. If the platform is not able to open the data, open the encryption, then even if it's sitting on our servers, it doesn't matter. We won't ever be able to unlock it. It's just myself and Naomi who had a message together. We each have our own keys, and both keys are required to open the data. Now, the government in the new EARN It Act and the secondary Lawful Access to Encrypted Data Act is basically saying that as a company, we must hold the key, or we must create some other tertiary backdoor into this data, and no longer can you be certain that it only belongs to you. I don't think that anyone would want to do that with their crypto private keys, for instance.
No, I think it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how cryptocurrency works. And it's just, I mean, it would be a disaster, right? It is this idea that there'll be backdoors. Like, what would the future look like if that happened? Because I imagine there's a whole lot of people who just would not be okay with that. So does that drive these companies overseas? Does it mean that you will end up having amazing privacy centers in Switzerland and other places, and the US just falls behind? Because, I mean, that's what it seems like. But even then, you see that the US has a very long arm with its reach. You see that, FBI was able to basically break Swiss banking, and what was once this kind of locked system, the US government was able to kind of just get in there. And the same with, just asking for information. The SEC is constantly asking for information for companies that are based overseas and supposedly don't have US customers. They do seem to have a really long reach. So I'm not even sure to the extent that moving overseas would help if the US went through with this.
I think it's definitely something on the mind of all of the major companies, though, and it's even been something that we've considered. Look at what happened with Facebook Libra. They announced that they're going to be focusing in Switzerland for that project, that is where they're going to establish, and the government brought Zuckerberg straight into trial. I mean, it was not even a question. Same thing happened with Telegram and the squash of the launch of Ton. It doesn't matter where your company is based. If you're primarily doing business in the US, or you primarily have capital coming from the US, you are going to be considered non-foreign entity. You're a US, jurisdiction entity. And for that reason, I think it's a global issue. This is not just a US issue. This affects everyone. Many of the major companies, if you look at Facebook, eBay, even Google, have headquarters in Ireland for tax purposes, Microsoft in Puerto Rico and other places, and that's the US, but they're looking for other places that have more advantageous rules around finance. They're going to definitely do that when it comes to, what is the true gold, which is data. In this case, what the government is doing is they're going straight for the gold. And I think that that's really understood. There's a really great quote that I love in The Great Hack, the movie The Great Hack, where Brittany Kaiser says that data is the new oil. And I think that's true. It's even more valuable than gold, actually. It's powering the entire digital nations. So this is a very serious topic. They are making a move to get access to the thing that can create, entire movements with people. And we've seen the absolute power that Facebook and Twitter have in terms of influence. And we've also seen the absolute danger that inherently happens when things like what you're saying, non-encrypted data exist, like the passwords in God mode. It's a second conversation, but it's definitely relevant.
Yeah, let's touch on that, because I think it's really important. And for me, it highlights how important it is to not create a master key or a backdoor or a God mode or whatever it is you want to call it, which is essentially, as you said, what the government is asking for right now. The Lawful Access to Encrypted Data Act, if companies like yours don't have access to data, the companies can be required to redesign their systems so that they do have access to it. And what happened with Twitter last week, was it last week? Gosh, I can't even, all the days roll into one. What happened was someone got access to one of these master keys. Imagine the damage that could have been done if they'd broken into Trump's account and they just tweeted out, incoming nuclear missile, this is not a drill. So it would have been a disaster if they'd started tweeting from Elon Musk's account about I'm selling all my Tesla shares. They could have completely created upheaval in the economy. Luckily, it was just a very unsophisticated Bitcoin scam that they perpetrated. But part of me wonders if that was just kind of a distraction and the real hack happened somewhere else, which was getting access to people's private messages, creating a bribery ring with all the information that they would now have at their disposal. That's the sort of danger we put ourselves in when we don't encrypt our messages, when we have things in the clear, and especially when backdoors are created and someone can come in and just access everyone's digital identity, everyone's private messaging system. It's just, it's a very scary situation, and the government seems to be trying to force the hands of some very privacy conscious companies to do this against everyone's best interest.
Yeah, it's completely unbelievable to me that major companies that have huge influence like Twitter are still using a basic password. We have evolved. We have at least two-factor authentication, which I think some people use, but keeping in mind, even though that is a very valuable step, we use our phone number, which has also proven to be extremely vulnerable, not reliable, and you can look up the many class action lawsuits in the hundreds of millions for every network just based on crypto losses alone for exposing that number. So, the company has the responsibility of having encryption layers on many different types of data. I don't know that they would ever get subpoenaed for passwords, but hackers are accessing them because it's their choice of how they're choosing to store them. Twitter actually had a hack for storing passwords in plain text a long time ago. And now it's the other problem of having administration or access levels in God mode, which allow them to access all accounts, whether or not they know the password. So it's a complete fallacy in the way that the systems are architected. However, it is also their right because they're a centralized service. So this is another step into how we need to redesign systems that if the users are going to inherently make so many contributions in terms of their content and drawing in audiences, maybe they need to have more of a stake in that. And I think that's where we are headed. That's where the decentralized model goes, or even the distributed model. It's really changing the way that this works. And I know people are not really excited about private keys and the potential to lose them or to lose access, but you also think about that balance. There are a lot of companies though that can help you with custody. There are ways to do it like multi-sig. It can be done responsibly. It just needs to be done with, trusted parties, or if you go with blockchain trustless systems that make it even better so that it's all your own responsibility.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely spot on. And it's just like, is this huge concern. And honestly, I think that it's incredibly negligent behavior when you have companies that have such disregard for people's, digital identities that they don't take more care to protect them. Hopefully it'll be a wake up call to Twitter, tell them, these digital identities are very valuable. We've seen that and we need to do more to protect them. And it's a liability issue when companies do have access to all of this data, because if they have access to it, it means that hackers have access to it too, unless the company is incredibly careful with all of that. So what a lot of companies end up doing is saying, listen, we actually don't want to keep any of your data. We're going to just destroy it. There are lots of companies out there that are saying like, we'll even, we might use your phone number or your credit card for verification, but we don't store any of that, because storing it is a giant target mark on our backs for hackers. We actually don't want that liability. I think companies need to be smarter with that and just store less information on users. But right now, Google, they make their entire business is collecting data on people and storing data and selling that data to advertisers and marketing companies and all kinds of companies. They would basically be handing over a huge chunk of where their profit is made. And so I just don't see companies wanting to take that leap eagerly, and especially if the government is even fighting them, saying that we actually don't want you to stop collecting data. We want you to keep collecting data so that programs like PRISM can keep working, so that we can keep accessing all the data that you're collecting. So there seems to just be like a misalignment of incentives there, where users are becoming increasingly more concerned about privacy, and companies kind of have this myopic view. They're focused on the profits that they're making and not really about what their consumers are going to want at the end of the day. I mean, do you foresee decentralized messaging apps? Do you foresee end-to-end encrypted messaging apps, all of that kind of taking over, and consumers really starting to push for this when they see what vulnerabilities are created when this information is out in the open?
People are already finding alternative platforms, and for a lot of different reasons. One of the things that I think is very important for people to think about is, is the channel that I'm using something that I expect to be upholding my privacy? And if so, am I 100% certain that they're doing it in the way that I want? And without reading the privacy policy or on every single site, you should be able to answer that question. For that reason, it's my philosophy that regardless of what is happening in this shift with government trying to take a stronghold on data, we should be putting front and center what our data policies are, just like how the EU required that every site shows the cookies. There's a responsibility for the user to be able to understand how it's used, tracked, all of that. But if you think about like a basic platform like email, for instance, you would think that because I send an email to you, it should be somehow inherently secured, or you send one to me and it's one-to-one messaging. And that's the same as we think about chats. It's one-to-one messaging, so of course it's secure. But email actually inherently can't even be encrypted. So first of all, Gmail isn't subject to the EARN It Act because they don't encrypt your data. And you should be very aware that your Gmail, and if you're using Google Apps, those accounts are not encrypted because they simply can't. You can't encrypt something that has to be accessed through many clients. So for the benefit of you having lots of different apps that you can plug your email into, Gmail's not able to encrypt your data. So be aware that that's actually happening on many email providers, and that's not even a type of encrypted data to begin with. And Google gets subpoenaed all the time to provide full access to Gmail in court cases. This is a huge known thing. So a lot of people know about the alternatives to email, encrypted email like Proton Mail. What's interesting about them is that they say on the front of their site that they're, secure email that's based in Switzerland, and they're putting a very fine point on the fact that their data centers in Switzerland, they're backed by the privacy and neutrality laws by Switzerland. And I think, that goes back to, will companies move offshore? Maybe. What happens if Apple decides that they don't want to put the backdoor access into every component of their encrypted data and they decide to leave? And that's their choice. They're leaving the US. So I do think that's a really relevant thing to think about. Who has the incentive to hold your data, read it, and sell it? Who has the incentive to back your privacy, and why are those companies doing it? But definitely don't have the illusion that anything is private unless it says so right in the front. Like, the reason that we're building a secure messenger is because we're building a secure messenger. That's it. We want to protect user data. We actually don't even want to protect it, by the way. We just don't want it at all. We want to give you something that you can use just like you're having a conversation in person, or just like you're sending a crypto transaction. You expect that it's peer-to-peer with no intermediaries. And that's how our messaging should be. We should not be expecting an intermediary. And if we do, then that's more of a public message. And that's kind of what is happening already today.
Absolutely. And that's so important, what you touched on about this presumption of privacy. End-to-end encryption only gives us what we think we already have. The average person, doesn't have an in-depth technical understanding of all of this stuff. I remember there's this great John Oliver clip that I cite a lot in my videos, because he interviews all these people in Times Square and he talks to them about, like, would you want the government to have a look at your private photos? And everyone's like, no. And he says, like, do you think a program like that exists? And they all say, no, I don't think a program like that exists. And I mean, I don't know how many revelations have to come out about the government's capacity to spy on us, but people just aren't getting it. They presume they have privacy. And so tech companies understand that people don't have this awareness and understanding that their things aren't private. And so they're going out of their way, many of them, like the good ones, are going out of their way to try to protect users' privacy on their behalf. Before the Snowden revelations, hardly any of the internet was encrypted. And then afterwards, like 80% of internet traffic became encrypted because Google made it a default, Apple makes it a default on their devices. All of these companies sort of said, okay, we've got to start doing this. We understood, like, the prison program, when we could be subpoenaed for data, but there's a lot of stuff going on that we weren't aware of. We didn't realize the government was hacking into our databases and getting information. And so they started encrypting things. And I think it's the tech companies that really do need to step in and kind of save people from themselves and just give them better products. Before we go on, I've got a few super chats here. I just want to give a shout out. So Crypto Morpheus says, breaking news, US banks green lit to hold cryptos. That's news that's just coming out right now, which is very interesting, sort of tangential to the privacy topic, but yeah, really interesting. Maybe we'll go into that in another episode. Message from Uvers, welcome back to the wild world of live streaming. I'm glad to be here, Uvers. I'm glad you are here too. We got another one here, Rikusa, is that how you pronounce it? Appreciate how you serve the world. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all of you guys for chiming in, because, as you know, I mean, my channel's kind of taken a bit of a turn in the last year. Privacy is just so tremendously important, especially because the governments are ramping up right now. They are fighting this. You have Lindsey Graham, you have Bill Barr, all of these people who are so anti-encryption and anti-privacy, and they want access to everything. Bill Barr, who's the Attorney General, literally said that he does not believe companies should be designing any system that precludes any form of government access. He literally wants access to everything. And so it's such an important topic right now. And I'm just so glad that you guys are interested in it, and you're all here joining it in. Oroteo says, keep it up, Naomi. Thank you, guys. If you want to send a crypto super chat instead, head to Cointree/Naomi Brockwell, and you can send one in crypto. Then I get to keep all of it, because Google actually takes 33% of everything, because they're like that. They take your data and your money. But I just sent that link in the chat there. And thank you guys so much. Let's move around a little bit and just talk a little bit about, like, we've talked about digital identities and how important they are. And we talked about this Twitter hack that happened. And I think, I mean, I just don't foresee a world in 10 years' time where companies are going to be storing access to our digital identities in such a nonchalant way. I just don't believe that companies are going to have these master keys anymore, because the liability is so high. But maybe I'm just kind of very hopelessly optimistic, and I see the issues. And what do you see in the future in terms of digital identity management? Because so much of our lives are lived on the internet. Our emails are an example of our digital identity. Our Twitter accounts are a part of our digital identity. Instagram accounts. Like, talk to me about digital identity management and what you foresee.
Identity is so huge. It's obviously, that's the number one thing that we have. It's our identity and our data combined, making the most valuable resource on the planet essentially now. I think that there's going to be a movement into self-ownership of identity as well. And we see a lot of companies working on that, like Civic and others. And that being, sort of the number one thing that is coming on board with new platforms. So they call it KYC on a lot of the platforms, know your customer, which is give us your ID, And we need to be sure that you're a real person and that you're a government approved person, and that we're going to give you access to our platform. Historically, I think major platforms have not really protected our identity. They have gotten better by anonymizing our data, but because they profit from who we are and who we're connected to and what our data is in association with that, we can't trust platforms to protect us. I think one of the crazy things to me is that there are data aggregation companies that buy data from Facebook and every service that you use, like Grubhub for food delivery, where some of these companies make more money selling your data about where the food was delivered than they do on actual delivery services. And people are just not very aware of that. So that's something to me that has to be changed. And do you remember when Facebook login came on the scene and all of a sudden every single website and every single app allowed you to log in with a Facebook button? It just happened overnight, it seemed like. And then Facebook login became so powerful because all of a sudden they owned all of the users. Facebook owned the user to your website because it was easier to log in with Facebook than with, a credential there. So the way to prevent passwords that could potentially be hacked or God mode stored like, well, it doesn't prevent God mode, but stored like in plain text, like the old Twitter hack, would be to do an identity service like the Facebook button, but that you have control of. So more like your Bitcoin private key, not in a centralized server. And that, I think, is the future of how we manage identity. It's going to have to be just like our healthcare data. Eventually, it's coming into us. I just had rain start overhead. I actually have like a skylight in my room here. This is what happens when you're in the tropics. I'll mute for a minute while you jump on the topic.
Yeah, no worries. So it's funny because so many people in the chat are saying like, isn't it ironic? You're talking about security and privacy and you're using Zoom. I totally get the irony there. I actually have a video coming out. I did some experiments with Ruben from Zcoin and Kieran from, I don't even know where to say you're from, Kieran, these days because you're involved with so much, but we did some experiments with different private video chat platforms to test them out. So that'll be coming soon, and we'll do a deep dive into encryption. I think the main thing when you're thinking about privacy is to think about your threat model. I am currently live broadcasting to the internet, so security and privacy clearly is not at the top of my my priority list. And Zoom, honestly, is unparalleled in terms of video quality, video conferencing quality right now. So obviously, if I'm going to be doing a YouTube live stream, I'll choose Zoom. I think they're a great company and provide a great service for that. In terms of privacy, I don't think they're a great company. And so if I want a private conversation, I definitely don't use them. In fact, I wouldn't necessarily encourage anyone to use video conferencing for private chats right now at all. I think that the tech is very much in its infancy. They're really trying to figure out how to do that well, but it's very, very difficult to do that, especially like the conferencing for more than one people. But I'll go into that in another video. So Crystal, let's talk a little bit about the industry leaders who are currently lobbying against this bill. What is being done right now to fight this? Because, I mean, I've been encouraging everyone who watch my show, I provide a link, I say, write to your local representative. You need to tell them that you do not want this. You know, they need to know that people who are in their voting jurisdiction don't want this, and to stand up for what people are being vocal about. But there's only so much that individuals can do. And at the end of the day, a lot of the changes come from lobby groups who will go and lobby the government. So what do you know about like leaders who are trying to fight this and educate politicians that, you know, this would be a disaster for internet freedom of speech and for privacy?
A lot of the people that I work with are in the same sector, in the same space, doing what we're doing. So from our perspective, from a business perspective, we're working to get ahead of the curve of the acts that may be coming. I think 100% every single person should know who their representatives are, know how to contact them. There are tons of websites and resources for this. And just like we were fighting net neutrality issues, and as those were coming up in the past years, get on board with an advocacy group, you know, for the right to protect encryption. I think that's extremely important. And in fact, we'll post some stuff out on Sense Chat's social channels coming up today or tomorrow, just to give some links. In terms of as a company and as a product and what we're doing, we have to stay ahead of things. Already, anybody working in Web3 has been ahead of the trend that's coming of, companies clamping down and wanting to own more and more, and government trying to get in. So we've been opening up. You'll see insert any favorite service you have after the word decentralized, it's coming. But primarily in content creation, social media, video content, you can see a lot of different platforms coming out. Voice is trying to solve for some of these problems. You have really great content sharing platforms and other messengers as well. We have others that are in the space that we love. SenseChat just happens to use crypto in a really interesting way. So we think that we've added on and added some community aspects. But the only thing that we can do is keep moving our technology ahead of the potential risks that are coming, rather than spending a lot of resources to fight it. So I'm on the side of getting ahead of loopholes and what might come down the pipe, so that we can continue to provide a service, as well as just continuing to educate people, because that's the number one thing, is just knowing what your rights are and what's about to be taken away from you. Until you know that, you have no incentive to get on board with the issue and be a part of it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a matter of thinking hard about policies that they're going through at the moment, and how governments are always going to use emergencies as an excuse to push things through. With the Earn It bill, they're saying, well, it'll help us stop child trafficking, and I think it was EFF put out a great article where they say, well, here are some great ways that you could target child trafficking specifically, and they're not doing those things. Why are they going after, internet data and free speech on the internet? Like it's usually a Trojan horse. I mean, Snowden said it really well. I think it was in a Joe Rogan interview where he referred to one of these bills that the government passed. It was called like the Noble Act or something. And he says, when something's called that, that it's going to be really bad, because they pretend that it's about this one thing, but really it's about data. And what we know, we knew it about the Earn It bill, that was about data right off the bat. It's about getting access and making sure that companies comply with data requests. And the Lawful Access to Encrypted Data Act just spells it out right there in the title. We know exactly what this is, and it would be a disaster there. So I just think it's so important that people understand what this bill is about and why it's going to affect them. And also just like talking more broadly about why privacy and freedom of speech on the internet is so important. Like, can you imagine what the internet would have been like if we didn't have this safe harbor for companies, like the chilling effects that it would have on free speech? Can we imagine, like, I think that, but you just kind of off topic a little bit, and the Snowden talks again about this, about how the internet sort of evolved, and how when it first started off, we didn't really have this understanding that our digital identities would become irrevocably linked with our real identities. You remember the days when you'd log in and you'd have some pseudonym and you'd be like, I'm invisible, I could talk about anything. And you knew that it was detached from your person. And this kind of made people more willing to play with ideas, to be broad-minded, because if someone called them out on something, they wouldn't take it personally because they're not associating it with their real identity. It's kind of this pseudonym that they created. And I think that as the internet evolved, suddenly, that shifted along the way, and the internet became irrevocably linked to our real identity. The NSA has made that their explicit purpose. They want to create a permanent record for all of us. Everything we do online is linked to our digital identity. It is stored in a permanent database, and their explicit goal is data storage forever. They want to keep this information forever. They've created giant warehouses to keep this information forever. And it's this shift that happened along the internet. And I think that for some people, maybe they're still in the mindset of early internet days, and they still think that there's that privacy, and that anonymous means that no one can know who they are. They can do things freely. That's just not the world that we live in. And we've moved away from the world of real life, where you say something to someone and it's this transitory thing. You say something face to face. There's no record of that face to face. Things are transitory. They change because humans are constantly in flux. Now we're in a world where everything we communicate with other people is stored forever and it's permanent. There is no transitory nature. There is no flux. Human beings are no longer allowed to be creatures in flux. People are called out on things that they've said 10 years ago when people don't understand that people change. So like society as a whole is really changing right now. And this idea of permanency in the internet, this idea of lack of privacy and everything being transparent with us also, I mean, for me, it's a very chilling trajectory. And I just wonder where you foresee the internet going. Like, do you think that people are going to have a wake-up call and start moving towards these private platforms? As you said, we've already started to see this happening, but it needs to go a lot further for us to actually change the trajectory and get these conversations going. So where do you think this is going to be going?
Well, I think it is like true life, real life. You know, anonymity was very fun, and that mentality still exists on some platforms. People like to have a screen name on Reddit. People like to especially be anonymous or pseudo-anonymous when they're trolling, you know, and it would be great if we could remove some of that internet trolling and bullying. And we can do that when we have explicit sort of binary on or off states of there's your identity and it's actually intrinsically linked, and we're not trying to fool those platforms. We're going to agree that everyone on the voice.com platform actually has a real ID, and we all are in agreement that everything's going on a blockchain somewhere. So we should probably only put the things that we want intrinsically linked to us. And that's a double-edged sword, right? And then on the flip side, if you want to be private and you want to be speaking in a room, you should use a platform that facilitates that. The challenge is we've blended the two things. So we have people who are trying to speak privately in a room to a group. It doesn't fundamentally work. You have to have the idea that if you're speaking to a group, you're broadcasting. That's public. Encryption works this way, actually. In SenseChat, we have group chats, but we limit them to 50 people. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's because we still offer end-to-end encryption, and it's nearly impossible to go beyond what, 256 is our sort of upper limit, but we're starting low to make sure that our technology is very solid. But you almost, at that point, even if you can create the technology, it's like, well, now you have how many points of exposure, how many nodes of humans are able to screenshot, share, forward, expose. And at that point, what's the point of having encryption? What's the point of having something private? Because it's no longer private, it's a group format, it's public. There's a tipping point. So we're exploring what that tipping point is. And I think people really need to consider that even private mode on Twitter and private mode on all these big networks isn't really private. It's not something that you should be going to and then get upset that something's leaked. Never use the Twitter DM for something that you wouldn't want the entire world to see. Just don't do it. It's just not something that, I think that we've really blended the lines between how we utilize the internet. And it's so powerful as a broadcast medium. For the first time ever, we've had this shift where broadcast companies don't control us anymore. The individuals in these micro broadcast formats actually control a lot more. So take the power of that, I think, is the answer, but do it through platforms that are going to responsibly handle your data, make sure that you own it so that you can monetize it. That's another huge, huge, huge issue. Even like you're saying, Google's taking a cut of what you're earning. You're using the platform, so that's an agreement that you make, but there are other platforms that will give you a full pass-through because it's not their business to take any kind of transaction that's in the middle. Their business relies on something else. So there's a fundamental shift of the way that the internet works. And I say this is the third time that the internet is going through a complete transformation. In this process, let's not let someone come in and take control and make it so that we don't have a free internet, or make it so that we don't have the internet that we're building. There are too many companies like ours that are working towards Web3 to get completely squashed in the process by some bills that have their own intentions.
Yeah, for sure. And it's so funny. I completely agree with you. I'm using YouTube right now. And so I'm agreeing to abide by their rules, and they will take a cut, and I'm grateful for that. And also there are other alternatives which maybe offer me a better deal. And people are starting to realize that. Like, I'm starting to earn more money on Library than on YouTube now. And on Library, it's a completely decentralized system. So, there are definitely some alternatives popping up that are really exciting. And there's also, what you said about like paying for products and all of that, it's important for people to realize that if you're not paying for a product, then you are the product. So if you're getting a free service, you have to think, how are these people earning their money? They're earning their money through data. And it's very important that people are realizing that. You mentioned a great point when you're talking about Twitter DMs and how people are using that for all kinds of personal details. I just want to stress that point because it's so important that people understand how open these systems are, that Twitter employees can read your messages, that people can bribe you for information that you've revealed there. Hackers can get in and get your home address. There is some really serious stuff that can happen when this stuff is hacked. So just be really careful. And on that note, I want to talk a little bit, just to kind of wrap up here, about tips for people. You had some great tips just then talking about controlling your own data, making sure that you're using private messaging platforms. But right now, it's very difficult to navigate these privacy waters and to figure out what's safe and what isn't. I think that people should understand how email works a lot better. You explained it really, really well when you just said it is an inherently insecure platform. And Snowden's mentioned that as well. He said, like, he doesn't have an email address because it is inherently insecure. And so he always encourages people to use private messaging apps. And so, SMS as well, completely in the open. So just be aware of the medium of communication that you're using and choose a more private thing if you want your stuff to be private. If you want it broadcast to the world, make a different choice. But unless you want it broadcast to the world, you have to make private choices. So let's talk, maybe just give some more tips about how people can be protecting their privacy right now and good choices that they can be making just for like privacy hygiene in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned SMS because SMS can go through up to 5 intermediaries. And we don't know if they are storing your data, and also it could potentially be trapped in transit. So, one of the major reasons why I set out to build a new messenger was not because I believe that the world needs yet another messaging tool. It was because none of them are doing it right. And I have messages that I'd like to send that I actually don't want a company to be capturing. So I want to be 100% sure that whatever I'm using, whatever tool I'm using is actually built with my interest in mind. And that's really hard to come by. So every single app that you use, even the ones that are, potential virus scanner apps, those are actually the worst. There's one that has 10 billion downloads that actually will ask you for every single permission. It's mostly popular on Android, and it asks you to give permission to the camera and give permission to your text and all these things. You're like, well, why would I need to do that? And so I think that that's one thing to think about, is turning off the permissions for nearly everything, unless you really do need to use it for a video chat, or you really do need to use it for something related to audio. Don't give them access to the microphone. These are really basic things. I think everyone is already pretty much aware, but there's still this kind of like culture of pressing the next button as quickly as possible to onboard, and forgetting that we need to add that extra layer of protection, because again, your data is the most valuable thing. Your identity and your data combined become something that everybody wants. I would say that there are so many different amazing platforms that are being built right now that are like ours. They're on the edge. We're in private beta. We're working really hard to get it to everyone. We have an early access program. You're going to see everything in Web3 is in this state. Like within 2020, 2021, they're all being released. We've been building for years in, collectively as a group, as blockchain technology has been improving. We have been working so hard. And for the people who are doing that, find those products, start using them, like Library. I just heard about this because you're on and wanted to see what it does and what it is. One of the great parts about these types of products is that they are actually creating an economy around their product. So if you think again about why would they not charge you a fee, or why would they only charge you if you have a crypto transaction, or what is the incentive for them? A lot of them have their own cryptocurrencies. A lot of them are building an economy around that token, and that is actually the more important, more valuable part of the system. So they don't want to monetize your data. They just want you to continue to use the system and create value within it. Some of them, so one of the experiments we have is essentially mining. You can, for every time that you log on, you get to mine tokens. And this is a distribution method that allows us to create a virtuous economy while not only rewarding you, but securing the network. So we're validating real people. We give you a consensus-based validation, and that sounds really complicated, but actually what it just means is that there's no centralized company verifying you. Like for the blue check mark, I finally got my blue check mark on Instagram.
Did you?
I am not popular enough to get a blue check mark through their team. It's been months of me getting impersonating accounts, trying to farm Bitcoin from people. They steal every single photo. They keep updated with my bio. I cannot keep ahead of it. They look like my name. And they have so many, I'm actually impressed. I need their strategy because they have so many followers and I'm just not very active. You know, so all my friends and all these people I barely talk to or know send me these messages saying like, this doesn't really look like you or sound like you when we start chatting, but it's a huge problem. So, you know, they finally verified me because I have a friend who works at Facebook and I'm so grateful that they did that. So that, you know, even with my low amount of followers, I'm a real person. And that's what we're doing. SenseChat is working to give everyone the power to do that. You validate the person, you vouch for the person, you choose when the blue check mark comes up. And that's a much different system as well. So, you know, I think that the main tip is just find the platforms that put things in your control and in your hands. And if they are building an economy, participate in it. A bunch of platforms are doing this. Voice will give you tokens every day just for logging in. Just go participate in the platforms, try them out, put your content there, see if it works. And I think that's going to help us to create this Web3 movement much faster.
I agree. And I try to keep on top of the new platforms out there and try them out, let people know how they go. And I've built so many amazing communities across all these different platforms, and they're all different. Like you'd think that you're just kind of doubling up and it's the same people, but it's not. You get very different cultures and communities across, like depending on the platform. So I'm excited to try out Voice. And yeah, I get impersonators every week on Instagram who just try to scam people out of their money. I use Cointree to as a verification tool. So I list all my legit social media platforms on there. And in my bio, I had my Cointree link. That's where, you know, if people see like a Naomi Brockwell messaging me, they could just click on my Cointree page. If that Instagram account isn't listed there, they know that it's not legit because I have all my legit ones there. So if anyone else wants to do that, Cointree is actually my platform. It's free. I just created it because I'm a content creator and I needed these tools for me. So go check it out and use it. It's all yours. This is an example where it's a free product, but I'm not collecting data. I'm just a content creator that wanted it for myself. So there you go. But speaking of Cointree, I want to message. I just got 2 super chats on there. I got, hi, I'm Kieran from the internet. Thank you, Meska, for that message. And then I had got another one from Kieran who says, the government does things like insisting that all encryption programs should have a backdoor. But surely no one is stupid enough to think that terrorists are going to use encryption systems with a backdoor. Terrorists will simply hire a programmer to come up with a secure encryption scheme. Kevin Mitnick, that's such a great quote. And it kind of reminds me of that Bastiat quote where he says, like, you know, also we shouldn't just presume that the people with access to the backdoor are all good. If they need to create these rules and regulations because there are bad people in society and they can use these things to stop the bad people, politicians are also made from the same matter as other humans. We can presume that there are going to be bad people involved there as well. Otherwise, they've been bestowed from heaven some amazing gift that puts us, you know, makes them more virtuous than the rest of us. Otherwise, they are made of the same matter. So I think that any system that gives open access to one group of people and doesn't give access to another, I mean, we just need to balance that in our minds and realize that we can't presume things will be safe just because people pretend or claim to be more virtuous. But it's, I mean, this is just a giant conversation that could go on for a really long time, Crystal. I'm really grateful to the work that you're doing. I'm grateful to you for the work that you're doing with, you know, lobbying this, with fighting against this, with spreading awareness so that people understand that this is an issue that they should take seriously. For all the work you're doing in privacy, to let people know that, you know, it is important for them to protect their own privacy, even if they feel like they have nothing to hide. It's so important that they protect it because there are so many things that could happen in the future. You may like the government that's in control at any particular time, but you create this database of information and you've created that and given access to any future government, any future person who comes into power, any hacker who could get access to that database. I mean, there's so much that goes on when we don't protect our privacy. So just a huge thank you to you and all the work you're doing. And I just really appreciate you being here. So just to wrap up, like any closing thoughts, any calls to action, what do you want people to know who've been watching this stream?
Yeah, thank you so much. Look, the number one thing that I strive for, and I think probably my life's purpose, is to help other people understand their sovereignty, right? Liberty and sovereignty are so important to me. Those are two of my core values and belief systems. And privacy is something that we should not feel bad about. Companies and governments are working to make us feel like privacy is something that we have if we want to hide. And that is not true. Privacy is a right that you have, and it's your choice. And there are many, many systems that you can use to be able to protect yourself and your data when you need to. And otherwise, you can still find me on Twitter, and you can find me on all of these other platforms, because I also believe that we should have large social gathering spaces. There's a time and a place for everything. So I would love if you have any thoughts or want to connect with me. If you find me on Twitter at Crystal Rose, you can also find Sense Chat online all over the place. We're sense.chat or at sense chat on Twitter as well. And we'll be posting some content shortly with some links of how you can take further action on the end-to-end encryption acts and how you can get more involved on a political stance if you are in the US. But love to chat with everybody. I hope to see you on Sense Chat and on other platforms. Thank you so much, Naomi, for taking the time today and weathering the rainstorm that I went through. This is actually my real background, not my Zoom background. There was a rainstorm overhead, and now we're back in the clear. Coming to you from Puerto Rico, here still in the US, but on a tropical island. Thank you so much.
It's I'm always jealous when I see where you're calling in from, because it just looks so gorgeous there. But please take care, keep doing the amazing work that you're doing. Thank you for being here on the show. You've spread some incredible information, shared it with all of the viewers today. Huge thank you to all the viewers who've been here watching this. I would love you to like the video, share it if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't. Check out Cointree if you haven't. I would love people to test that out and take a look at what's going there. Thank you to all the people who sent super chats. And that's going to end today's session. Privacy is so important. So I'll put a link to all the stuff that Crystal talked about in the description, a link to Sense Chat, a link to the petitions where you can talk to your representative about these bills and voice your concern and tell the representatives you don't want them to pass. I'll put all that into the description. Everyone go have a nice day. Crystal, you're amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I'll chat to you soon.
Naomi. Thanks everyone for watching.
Okey-dokey.